Welcome to the WorkOS Fall event. My name is Michael Greenwich. I'm the CEO and founder of WorkOS. We have a lot of stuff to show you today. I'm super excited. Thank you all for joining on Tuesday. We have a bunch of folks from the team in the chat. So while we're going through this, feel free to jump in, ask questions. If you have any details, they'll be able to help you out. But let's jump in. I'm really excited to share this stuff with you. All right. So here's our agenda for the day. So to get started, we're going to talk about first crossing the enterprise chasm. So this is something for those of you that attended the summer release. It'll be a little bit of review, but this is kind of the context for WorkOS, why we're building this company, what the product is for, and really why we think that this enterprise chasm is both, the biggest risk to many companies' business, but also your biggest opportunity. So excited to chat about that. We'll start there. Second, we're going to talk about how you can get started with WorkOS to add the most important enterprise-ready features to your app. So we're going to start by talking about universal auth with WorkOS single sign-on, SSO. We're also going to talk about how to configure this with something called the admin portal, and then do a little bit of a deep dive into groups and permissions with directory sync. This is something that's becoming much more popular. If you've heard of SCIM before, that's what we're going to go into and talk about there. And there'll be some product features and demos along with this. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the developer experience at WorkOS. We are an extremely developer-focused company. We just obsess around the developer experience. And one thing we did over the last several months was completely rewrite and rebuild our documentation. So we're going to do a deep dive on this around why we did this, how we spent why we spent months doing it, how we thought through it, and things that we learned along the way. We know a lot of you are developer-focused companies as well, or you have an API. So I want us to be able to share those learnings with you and talk about our documentation. We're also going to talk about how we do support at WorkOS, and this is pretty unique. When we started supporting customers in the last 6-7 months after we launched, we really weren't happy with the typical way that developer products are supported, or typical SaaS products around firing off an email and waiting 24 hours for support. So we've really brought a new perspective to this around using shared Slack channels for really rapid support with developers. Those of you that have integrated have probably experienced this. So we're going to do a talk about that, to talk about how we've actually built some internal tools around this to actually engineer developer joy. And then lastly, today to wrap up, we're going to have a fireside chat with Bryant from Webflow. Bryant is Webflow's CTO and co-founder. Webflow is a somewhat recent WorkOS customer. We're powering single sign-on for them. So we're going to have a fireside chat to talk a little bit about their integration experience, why they picked WorkOS, but also talk about how to unlock growth, how to hyperscale teams, and really just how Webflow broke out as a product. Really excited about that. So that'll be at the end. Stay tuned, definitely for that. So a lot of stuff today. Buckle up. There's a lot to get started. Okay, let's dive in. So I want to frame this and start with a story. So start with some story time. So imagine that you are a founder. So this is a tale of a SaaS company. And imagine that you're building something new, like a new workplace app. Say you're building, Slack, a chat tool. And probably what you do is you launch this, bottom up, you launch it on Product Hunt, and it's driven forward by product love. Users love this, and adoption spreads through word of mouth, viral growth, people inviting each other to the product, right? Probably you start charging for it, and some individuals maybe put in credit cards and start paying for it, and then some small teams start paying for it. And then eventually here, when you're eager to grow revenue, you essentially just approach the bigger users, bigger companies, for bigger deals. So you'll have penetration in these organizations that are big companies, and you want to close them as customers. And this is kind of the tale of all SaaS companies, moving up market. This is the same thing that Dropbox has done, Slack has done this, Asana's done this, Atlassian, Trello, you name it. This is really the modern bottom-up SaaS motion. But there's a problem here. So probably what happens is you go to this big potential customer that you have on deck, and they say to you, hey, your app is great. We are ready to buy it. We already love your wiki tool, your communication tool, whatever you're supporting. And they say, but here's our standard app vendor requirements. So the standard, requirements that they have for any SaaS vendor that they use. And they'll send this to you, and this is the reaction that most founders have, most companies have, because this is totally a set of features and functionality that kind of comes out of left field that you're not expecting. And this is what I call the enterprise chasm. So I've talked about this before. And really the core essence of this is that your end user, the person that you previously were serving, was the buyer. They were originally putting in their credit card, but that's no longer the case. Now you have a totally different audience that you're selling to. And realistically, enterprise IT, the CIOs are the gatekeepers for those deals closing. And they have a totally different set of needs than the user. The end user cares about product features, but IT has a different set of requirements and needs. And these enterprise features realistically are just kind of boring for your team to build. It's a lot of legacy protocols you have to integrate with, and there's buggy edge cases and sprawling different integrations. And over time, this becomes a big maintenance burden. Today, Slack's engineering team, I think about a third of them work on enterprise functionality. So it ends up becoming, a really substantial investment, and that takes away from essentially core product development as well. Enterprise IT also doesn't care about your special product features. If you think your product is just going to be so good that they'll buy it anyway, you might be able to find some early adopters that do that. But realistically, as you actually go look at enterprise IT, they care about other stuff like SAML. And if you don't have that, it's a deal blocker. So you got to do this stuff. So this is the enterprise chasm. And there's so many companies that kind of get stuck through this, muddle through it. Oftentimes what you'll see is, a company has a lot of bottom-up product-driven growth. They'll raise some money and start growing, but their revenue dramatically lags where the product maturity is. And it's because they don't have these features. So this is why we built WorkOS, because it turns out these features that you need to become enterprise ready, it's the same feature no matter what you're building. So you would have to write the exact same code if you were building a wiki tool to make it enterprise ready, as if you were building a chat tool, as if you were building a design tool. Doesn't matter. It's the same features. So what WorkOS helps you do is cross the enterprise chasm. And essentially what this does is unlocks the enterprise market, unlocks revenue for you. So it allows you to go close these deals. We don't make your product better. We just let you go actually sell to those enterprise customers, those leads that you have on deck. And my guess is if you're attending this talk, if you're at least interested in WorkOS, you're probably in this bucket. And you probably have at least a handful of big deals that you could close tomorrow if you had these features. And that's what we love helping companies do. Okay, so let's dive in and talk about what makes your app actually enterprise ready. So there's a couple things we're going to focus on today in this talk. If I was just going to talk about everything to make your app enterprise ready, it'd probably be like a really long sermon and I could write a book. So we're just going to narrow down around how to get started. So WorkOS does this by introducing pre-built enterprise features and functionality. And we include the UI in this. So if you can think about how WorkOS actually does this, it's at the infrastructure layer and it's created for developers. So if you're a developer and you've used a modern API, a modern REST API, this is going to be no sweat to integrate. We have webhooks, great SDKs in multiple languages, seamless integration across fragmented enterprise IT systems. So it's kind of like a piece of fabric that stretches across all this different fragmented landscape. And you think about this as product layer infrastructure. So if you use something like Twilio or Plaid for building an app, this will be right in that layer. Oftentimes people call us like Stripe for enterprise features. So that's a great way to situate it. Okay, so what do actually IT admins require? What enterprise features do they require? The core essence of getting started in the enterprise is you need to have externally connected authentication and group management. That's totally a mouthful, but what this means is the actual user auth, so the authentication for a user signing in, should be using the system that the IT admin provides. For example, that could be something like Okta. So that's single sign-on, if you've ever heard of that. Now, SAML is one of the protocols. Okta is like an identity provider. Microsoft's an identity provider. OpenID connectors, all this stuff. We'll get into that in a second. But essentially, allowing users to authenticate using a third-party system. And then the second thing here is group management. So, if you imagine you are building that SaaS app and you're going and selling to like FedEx, right? Big organization. I think they have like 200,000 employees. There's no way they're going to log into your app and like manually add and remove people or manually change permissions for groups. They actually want to connect that to their group system, which is probably something like Active Directory or their HR system. And so you need to be able to sync in that directory to your application and change group membership based on it. So if you've heard of SCIM, SCIM, that's one protocol. Active Directory, Workday, something like tying into Gusto for SMBs, or Google Directory. These are all directory sources, but the functionality is the same, connecting groups and dynamically changing membership and permissioning based on that. So these are the two ones we're going to dive into today. And then the third thing that you'll need is some kind of UI for configuring this and managing it. Not everything here can be done behind the scenes. You need to have some abilities to actually manage this. So there's a lot more under the features around becoming enterprise ready. Like I mentioned, audit logs is a big one. Authorization, which is separate from authentication, just a little not counterintuitive sometimes, but access control policies, compliance features, security, the list goes on and on and on and on. Feature release, management, invoicing, all this stuff. But really, these first two that I mentioned, user auth and group management, are the core. So if you're interested in this stuff, I gave a talk last year at SAS School about it. Goes into detail in a lot, but we're just going to focus on these today. So let's talk about single sign-on. So this is the very first thing people need. You've probably heard about this. As a quick review, what is SSO? So SSO enables users to sign into to all their applications at work with a single password, a single identity broker, rather than maintaining their own passwords for every different app. If you've used like signing with Google, that is a form of single sign-on, but not every company uses Google as their identity service. So enterprise organizations will buy stuff from like Okta, Microsoft, or there's a really long list of these, like VMware has an identity system, Symantec has an identity system. Some companies will run an in-house identity system, like I believe Stripe internally runs their own shibboleth server with their own identity layer for internal uses. So, it's many different systems, but functionally, it all does the same thing, allows users to sign in with a single password. And not having this is really a deal breaker for enterprise customers. And the reason why is it's a core security feature. So if your app needs to have another password to sign in, that's an attack vector. That's something that can leak. And so this is by far the number one requirement that people will require, IT admins will ask for. And realistically, this actually isn't even an enterprise feature anymore. You'll find that SMB is like, say, you sell a 60-person company who wants to buy your tool. They'll probably want SSO because it's a security need and they're having a proliferation of different tools. So this is kind of getting pushed downstream. So common protocols under the hood here, something like SAML is a protocol, OpenID Connect is a protocol, ADFS, which is Active Directory Federation Service, is a protocol, oAuth is a protocol. Functionally, they're all doing the same thing, just through different systems of exchanging data. And you've probably seen this before. I mentioned Google Auth, but if you've ever worked at a bigger company that used SSO, this is an example of how it looks inside of Slack. So you could say, hey, click sign in with Okta, and that gets you into Slack. But Okta here could be many, many different SSO providers. Simply supporting Okta is actually not enough for enterprise. The problem with this is that the landscape is really fragmented in terms of identity systems. So these are really complex to build, and they require ongoing development to get right and maintain. And it's really sensitive code, right? Because this is authentication. You kind of can't afford to get it wrong. At Stack Overflow, they did this earlier this year, and it took them 3 engineers 3 months just to add Okta. That kind of gives you a sense of how complicated it is. And even though SAML is a protocol, not every SAML provider is kind of equal. They're all implemented different ways and have different fragmented ways that they handle the protocol. We have a great blog post about SAML vulnerabilities. It's essentially really easy to shoot yourself in the foot with SAML. So definitely check out that post. The result of this is that when people build it in-house, you have initially a really brittle integration, and that's tough because you're onboarding enterprise customers and they're frustrated, and honestly, it can just break stuff as you're rolling it out, which is not a good look. So these are a few of the common ones at the bottom, but anybody can be a SAML provider. Anybody can be an OpenID provider. There's literally hundreds of others. So our solution, how do we do this? Well, we essentially act as an intermediary and run WorkOS as middleware for your app. So your app connects to WorkOS, and then we do the integration with all these different systems that span many different enterprise customers. It's kind of similar to using Stripe. You don't have to go talk to Visa and MasterCard and Discover and Alipay in China and all this stuff. Stripe acts as the intermediary for you. We're doing the same thing, intermediary infrastructure. So one integration, it's really fast to drop in. And even though we're in between, here's what it looks like. So this is, let's see if I can get this to play. This is a little demo video of a company called HumbleDot that used WorkOS pretty early on. So user comes here, clicks sign in with SSO, and then boom, it goes right to Microsoft. In this case, Microsoft's the identity provider for this account. So you didn't see anything through WorkOS when they click sign in, but this is all within the WorkOS ecosystem right now. They sign in. If you do any two-factor auth, it would be here, and then boom, right back to the developer's app. So I like showing this to say, hey, there's nothing to show. If you're using WorkOS, your users just sign in. They have no idea that WorkOS is under the hood. And that's kind of how we like it. We like to be in your corner, but not in your kitchen. So that's WorkOS SSO. That's in production today. Tons of folks are using it. I mentioned Webflow. This is what's powering Webflow SSO. Compatible with all identity systems. It's super, super fast to integrate. Usually it takes an hour or less. We'll do it over Zoom with you if you want. It's hard to say how much time this saves because we keep adding stuff to it, but it's at least months of engineering time. And we just price this usage based. So it's really cheap to get started. It's totally a no-brainer. We want this to be affordable to every company so that there's no reason not to have SSO. Okay, but there's another problem here. And that is SSO setup is really complex and buggy. So what I mean by this is because there's all these fragmented SAML implementations, actually configuring the stuff through X509 certificates can present these like encoding issues, non-standard metadata files and formatting, different types of IDP URIs. XML canonicalization is a big, huge problem. And it gets even more complex with Microsoft ADFS and OpenID Connect. So this is super, super painful. And effectively what this results in is like a really bad customer experience. You're trying to onboard a big enterprise customer and you're saying, hey, yeah, we have SSO. And they're like, cool, let's set it up. And then you fall on your face, with your biggest deal that's been in your pipeline for months. So this is really not a great experience. So we set out to solve this as well. And this is actually a much subtly more complicated problem than just kind of the SSO authentication gateway that we built. And the solution that we came here to is that we want to provide the UI. We actually realized we can't just be an API. We actually have to provide the UI. And so what we have is WorkOS actually can provide the setup UI wizard for actually configuring this stuff. It's fast and really simple for developers to integrate this. So it's just kind of a couple lines of code to plug this in. And you get inline documentation. It handles all the edge cases and error states to fix this. And our goal here is just to have fail-proof ergonomics. So you can send an IT admin into this wizard, into this experience, and SAML setup is going to happen correctly. You don't have to loop in your sales engineering team. You don't have to loop in, really anything. We handle that for you. Because who wants to learn how to integrate SAML? Probably not your team. You don't want to become experts in it. If you do want to become experts, we are hiring, but probably you don't. You want to build your app. So this is the solution, and we call this the admin portal. And to talk more about this, I'm going to hand it over to Wilman, who's an engineer on our team, who's going to run through the admin portal features, show a quick demo, and talk about why we built it.
Hi there. My name is Wilman. I'm an engineer at WorkOS. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the WorkOS admin portal. Specifically, I want to talk to you about how the admin portal is an extension of your application. Then, we're going to walk through setting up a single sign-on connection together in under 2 minutes. Finally, I want us to take a look at the ways that the admin portal lets IT admins manage their connections after they've been created. So with that, let's jump on in. Here we have an application called Memex. They've integrated the WorkOS admin portal into their application to allow self-serve single sign-on setup for their customers. Today, we'll be doing just that. Memex has chosen to place their link to the admin portal on a settings page and display a configure single sign-on button. But we leave it up to you to decide how the admin portal best fits into your application and matches your unique needs. The only requirement is that you have a button or link that requests a URL that will initiate an admin portal session from our API. Then, all you need to do is redirect to that URL like this. Once we're in the admin portal, we're presented with a grid of identity providers. The admin portal has documentation for each of these identity providers that was tailor-made for it. If you don't see the exact one you need, we have support for generic SAML and OpenID Connect, which will allow setting up connections to a wide range of different identity providers. We're always adding more here, and you'll automatically gain support for them as they're added with no work required from you. Today, we're going to set up an Okta connection. Setting up a single sign-on connection can be a fraught process that's confusing for newcomers and requires developers to have specific context into the nuances of each identity provider. But with the WorkOS admin portal, when we click an identity provider, the first thing you'll see is screenshots and documentation guiding the IT admin through the process. The admin portal also provides the exact data we will need to provide to our identity provider in an easy-to-copy input field along with detailed screenshots of the identity provider. So let's add the ACS URL to our clipboard and move on over to Okta. The documentation in the admin portal shows us exactly where we will need to provide the ACS URL, making it easy to follow along even if we've never done this before. Let's paste the ACS URL into both of these fields and then head back to the admin portal. Moving on to the next step, we'll configure our attribute statements. Again, the admin portal has all the fields we need to set up and screenshots of where to paste them into our identity provider. All of these fields can be conveniently copied to your clipboard with just a click. Back over in Okta, we'll make quick work of pasting these all in, and then we'll move back to the admin portal. We've now set up an Okta application, and we're almost there. We can quickly submit the application feedback in Okta to complete the setup process. The only thing we have left to do is grab some information from our newly created Okta app. The admin portal will tell us exactly where to go, and once we're there, we'll be able to copy these URLs and then paste them into the WorkOS admin portal. Finally, we download the X509 cert from Okta and upload it. And that's it! We have a single sign-on connection. The next step is to test it out and make sure everything is working properly. To do so, let's click the Test Single Sign-On button and then sign in with our Okta account. When we're redirected back to the admin portal, we will see that we were able to authenticate properly with this flash message. We've now confirmed that everything is working properly, and we didn't break a sweat. But creating connections is just the start of what we're doing with the admin portal. We're building the tools for IT admins to manage their own connections. They can monitor the recent activity of the connection and quickly find any authorization attempts that ran into issues. Once we find a failed activity, we offer the ability to inspect the full request and response to determine any issues. In some common error cases, we offer guides to help point to the exact issue to help shepherd the IT admin through resolving their issues, saving you from the back and forth of debugging with them and letting you focus on working on the things that are important to you instead. The admin portal also has support for custom branding. We offer the ability to remove all references to WorkOS from the admin portal and to add custom DNS so that the admin portal blends seamlessly into your application, making it feel like your IT admins never need to leave to set up their single sign-on. So that's the admin portal. We're super excited to be showing it to you today. The admin portal is available to all developers of WorkOS on our starter plan and up. But before we go, let's have one last summary of what we just saw.
All right. I don't know. That's a bit of a stunner every time I see that video. We are really obsessed around this problem around helping developers get SSO into their app. And we've really gone kind of to the ends of the earth to do this with the admin portal. I think for those of you that start using this, you're really going to love it. It's completely a game changer for getting your users to have a more secure authentication mechanism and really just removing this entire burden from your support team. It handles all the complex UI setup for connecting SAML or OpenID Connect or Okta connections or anything. You never have to source certificates or auth tokens yourself. That's entirely on us. And you get this completely up-to-date, best-in-class screenshots of all the different IDPs. And best of all, you can custom brand that to your UI. So it's a totally seamless experience for your users. If you're interested in using that, shoot us a note. We'd love to show you a little bit more details around it and get you ramped up. And there's even more stuff we're planning to put into that. So really, really excited about that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about group management and directory sync. So this is if you remember, the other feature that I mentioned that developers, will need to have essentially in order to go into those bigger enterprise environments. And what directory sync really lets you do is connect groups managed by a third-party system to your app. It's really just like gluing that data together. So directory sync, you can think about this as user and group sync. That's what's in the directory. And the functionality that you get out of this, the first is that you can provision and deprovision users automatically. Now, this allows you to account for all users on day one. So it's not just creating user accounts and people sign in, but it actually lets you know about everyone in the company right away as soon as you're connected. Benefits of this, you can create like a shadow account. So you can mention people that have never even signed into the tool. This dramatically accelerates adoption of your product. So if you're like a collaboration tool, like a issue tracker or a wiki tool, this is really, really powerful. You can also deactivate user sessions immediately when people are removed from the organization. So this lets you deprovision in real time. And this is a huge, huge security feature. This is usually why IT admins ask for a SCIM or directory sync, is to specifically deactivate users. And with WorkOS, for any directory system, you get webhooks and you can do this. So provisioning and deprovisioning users automatically is one part of directory sync. And then the second thing here is groups. So directory sync, you should sync in the groups and then bind those to roles and permissions inside your app. So the admins, are pulled in from an admin group inside of Google or inside of Workday or Active Directory, and your app responds to that. So the IT admin doesn't need to log into your app and change the groups there. They can change it in their group management system that they use. So centralized management for security and compliance needs. And this again is often a deal breaker, those 1,000+ person companies, because they'll have an admins group that they want to give additional access to, and they need to be able to show, hey, when we remove people from that group, their permissions change immediately. So this one you might not have seen in the wild. You maybe have, but maybe didn't know that it was there, depending on the size of your company. So here's a couple examples. So 1Password. So you probably know 1Password as the ability to kind of save passwords and do like multi-factor auth. 1Password actually has group sync in it. So inside of 1Password, you can actually connect through a SCIM gateway your directory system, and you can sync in different groups and bind them, to groups inside of 1Password. So you can only give certain credentials to a certain group that's coming from your directory system. Another example, this is actually Dropbox. So Dropbox has a group management interface, where you can go in and actually create a group and automatically share folders with a group. But you can also connect directories to Dropbox, whether that's like Active Directory. This is Azure Active Directory in this case. And then you can use those Active Directory groups inside of Dropbox. So if you're a big company like the New York Times or News Corp or something like that, this is super, super useful because you probably already have like a design team, you have a marketing team, and you can sync those into the app. AWS actually also has this too. And so you might have played around with this. We definitely recommend you turn this on and use this if you're a tech shop. But essentially what you can do in AWS is take IAM policies and bind them to groups coming from an external identity system, an external identity provider. So that could be coming from, again, like Workday or Gusto. In our case, we use Okta, and we have our infrastructure group connected to our engineering group, and we have we don't have this many people at WorkOS, but you can imagine a bigger organization. Great. So to show more about this and show a demo, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, an engineer on our team, to walk through actually how group sync works in an example application and sort of what the actual customer experience would be for that. Mark?
Hi everyone, Mark from WorkOS Engineering here. Today I'm going to show you how to use WorkOS Directory Sync to power groups with permissions in our test app, Memex. Let's start by looking at our current users and groups. We'll click on People in the sidebar. You can see that we have a couple of initial users here. Next, let's check out our groups. And we have a default admins group here. So let's sync in users and groups from a directory sync source. We'll head over to the WorkOS dashboard for that. And now that we're in the dashboard, we'll go to the directory sync section. And we'll add a new connection. This will be for FooCorp. And the directory type is G Suite. We'll go ahead and copy the setup URL here. And we'll put it into new tab. Click Allow. And great, the connection is set up. So we'll go back to the WorkOS dashboard. And you can see here that users and their groups have been synced in. And we can go over to the webhooks tab. And you can see that there are webhooks for users and groups. So this is what the payload looks like for a group webhook. So we've already implemented the processing in Memex to handle this webhook. But the details of that will be different depending on the architecture of your platform. So let's go back to Memex. And we'll take a look at the people section again. And you can see here that all the users from our G Suite directory were synced in. And if we go to groups, the groups were synced in from G Suite as well. So let's take a look at our design group. And you can see here that there's only one person in this group. So we'll go ahead and head over to the G Suite admin console. And we'll go to groups. We'll go into the design group. We'll take a look at the members. And we'll add a couple more members here. So you can see that Boo and Paige were added inside of the Google admin console. So we'll go back to Memex. And we'll refresh our group. And you can see that they were also synced into our Memex app. So we'll go back to the groups listing. And we can go ahead and give the design group read and write permissions. And we'll give our contractor group no permissions. So these are global permissions for our notes. And we can also go to one of our notes. And you can see here that we can send a message to an entire group. So WorkOS provides the integrations and data to drive powerful product and security features in your app. And that's groups with WorkOS Directory Sync. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark, for running through that. So just as a quick recap, Directory Sync lets you provision an entire organization at once. You can sync those groups in, have dynamic membership and permission updates inside of your app. You can deactivate users. There's a ton of stuff that you can do with Directory Sync. The WorkOS Directory API is the same no matter what directory you're connecting. So if you're connecting Gusto or Workday or Google or Active Directory, it's the same core attributes that come through. We also expose the raw attributes. So if, say, there's a special attribute like t-shirt size or something in the directory, you would get that into your application. But you can depend on it as being a unified API that works everywhere, very similar to single sign-on. So we're super, super excited about this. It's a little bit more complex and a little bit more sophisticated than just SSO, but it also really supercharges your app for large users and large organizations. And if you've ever heard an IT admin ask you for SCIM, SCIM, this is the functionality that they're asking for. This is the product change that they want. And the cool thing about WorkOS, like I mentioned, is it works everywhere. We have support already for Okta, Workday, SCIM, G Suite, Bamboo HR, Active Directory, and we've just rolled out support for Gusto, which is really sweet. Rippling as well, and PeopleSoft. I think it's right on deck. It's like essentially rolling out right now. We're adding more and more to these every quarter. We just kind of knock them down. There's no standard protocol for directory systems, which is sort of funny. SCIM is semi-standard, but the rest of these we've essentially built custom. And what WorkOS gives you is a unified API. So super, super excited to see what you all do with this. There's a great set of features already around provisioning and deprovisioning, but sky's the limit with this type of data. So those are the two things that I mostly wanted to talk about around the WorkOS features: user authentication through SSO and also directory sync. Want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about some things that we've done internal over the last 3 months to improve our developer experience. And the first thing here is to talk about a deep dive on our developer docs. Deep dive on developer docs. Try saying that 10 times fast. We spent several months re-architecting, rewriting, redesigning our documentation. And I'm delighted to hand it over to John Palmer to be able to talk about why we did this, how we thought through it, and more. John?
Great. How's it going, everybody? My name is John. I'm a designer here at WorkOS, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our new developer documentation. But before I jump into a live demo, I'd like to start by telling you a little bit more about how we think about documentation as a company and what our design process was like on this. Okay, so let's start by talking about how we think about documentation. We are a seriously developer-focused company. And so for us, documentation is a core product. Documentation is really the first place that developers come to integrate with any of our APIs and services. So therefore, they should be designed with similarly great developer ergonomics. Documentation, it also helps us internally. The process of writing documentation for an external audience helps us make sure we're making good design decisions at every step of our process. So just like anything we do at WorkOS, our primary goal with the doc site is to make it as easy as possible for developers to go from nothing to onboarding enterprise customers. And I'll share a little bit about why we decided to redesign our docs now. So we had an existing doc site that looked pretty clean, but last quarter we started to hit the limits of what that site could do. You can see that this site had this single left navigation bar that contained all of the content on the entire doc site. And as we continued to write more content, this nav bar got pretty cluttered and difficult to use. Additionally, we had identified lots of ways to improve our documentation itself. As we've seen more and more developers integrate these features and ship to production, we've learned a ton about how to make that integration process easier. And we wanted our documentation to reflect all of those learnings. With this in mind, we started to redesign our documentation from the ground up. So let's talk about the design process. I don't have time to share our whole process, but I do want to share our thinking and the most crucial design decisions that we made. Our design process started with a core belief that documentation design starts with content. The content itself is core to the developer experience and needs to be considered before anything else. We love having a great UI and lots of visual polish, but no amount of visual polish can make up for mediocre content. So that's where we started. When a developer comes to our doc site, the bar for a good experience is pretty clear. Have we written the documentation that developers need? Is it well organized and easy to find? And does the documentation help developers accomplish their goals? Meaning the content is well written, it doesn't skip around, and it's easy to follow, and it's thorough. When developers finish reading documentation, they've answered all their questions. With that in mind, we started by building a content framework. We wanted to have a clear mental model for the kind of content that we write in our docs. So our team performed an audit of our existing documentation to build this out. We threw everything in a Figma file and asked a bunch of questions. What documentation do we have and what's missing? Is there anything that could be renamed to be more clear? Do we have content that could be merged together or things that could be broken apart? And finally, do we have a way to categorize this clearly? That process yielded this content framework. So we have 4 main categories of content that make up a great doc site. This is in the context of WorkOS, but I think anyone designing developer documentation would benefit from using a similar framework. So we think about docs in terms of rising levels of abstraction. At the bottom, we have an API reference, which is low-level documentation of all WorkOS resources. Above that, we have feature documentation, which is still technical and pretty low level, but oriented around integrating core WorkOS features. A level up from that, we have tutorials and guides, which are guided technical walkthroughs focused on accomplishing higher level goals. And finally, at the top, we have enterprise-ready content, explaining WorkOS features in the context of enterprise readiness and the industry that we're in. Since we also care about shipping quickly, we decided to focus on what we think is the core foundation of a great doc site, a comprehensive API reference and complete documentation of all WorkOS products. And we have a clear goal in mind for each of these. For our API reference, we want to give developers a clear and comprehensive view of all WorkOS resources. And for our feature documentation, we want to make it as easy as possible to integrate WorkOS features and start onboarding enterprise customers. So with that in mind, we moved on to the next part of our design process, which is writing. And I can't emphasize enough how important this step was. The content you choose to write and how you choose to write it is core to the developer experience on your doc site. So core design decisions actually take place during this phase. And I'll tell you more about those decisions we made as we walk through the site. So let's do that now. Here we go. Great, so welcome to our new doc site. I want to start off by showing you our API reference. So we spent a ton of time writing content for this API reference. Every endpoint, object, query parameter, and status code is documented. And a big part of this was writing code samples in every language. So as you can see here, WorkOS offers native SDKs in a lot of popular programming languages. You can click on any of these, and code samples across the entire page will update. Additionally, your choice persists site-wide between sessions. So docs are always in the right context. You can also click to copy any code sample. So let's take a look at an endpoint. I'll come down to the get authorization URL endpoint. As I scroll, you'll notice that the site is laid out side by side, so relevant code is always visible. I know we talked a lot about writing, and that includes writing code. So for every endpoint, we've written example requests and responses so that you know exactly how to interact with that specific endpoint. And again, we've done this in every language. You can switch your language between any of our SDKs, or if you just want to use our REST API, you can see a curl sample as well. I'll switch back to Python. You may have also noticed that as I'm scrolling, the URL bar changes. So I can actually link to any part of this page. If I'm working with another developer and I want to share this specific query parameter, I can copy the link to that parameter. I also want to show one more feature of our code samples. If you log in, code samples actually show real values. So I'm logged into our WorkOS demo account here, and you can see that real API keys, project IDs, and environment variables will be inserted into these code samples. What that means for a developer is you can copy and paste this code directly into your app, and it just works. You don't have to keep modifying the code. So that's all I want to show you for now on the API reference, but I definitely recommend diving into it more. And with that, I'll go back to the homepage and we'll dive into our feature documentation. Since we just talked about directory sync, we'll start there. So as we were designing and writing our feature documentation, we thought about experiences we've had. And we've all experienced an integration where we've come to a doc site and jumped between a dozen different tabs just to integrate a feature. We didn't want that to be part of the WorkOS developer experience. So we took a new approach. We built a single holistic integration guide for each feature that includes everything you need to go from zero to production. In these guides, we include high-level context and technical overview. We include environment variables and the values you need to set. We also include SDK-specific endpoints in every language that you can copy-paste directly into your app. We also include things like edge cases to handle, use cases our API supports, and what you need to do to release to production smoothly. So let me walk through the directory sync guide here. We start with an overview and we mention all of the directory services we support. Then we give you context of what we'll build, and we include relevant content from the API reference so that you don't need to jump between pages. Then we give you a linear flow for integrating this feature into your app. Starting with creating a connection, we include inline documentation for each directory provider. Then we move to integrating the code into your app. And as you can see, my choice of Python from earlier on the API reference persists here. So I'm seeing real live Python code with examples that work in my app. So it's really easy to integrate this feature. Finally, for directory sync, we move on to receiving webhooks. And again, I've emphasized how much we cared about writing content. So we don't just include the types of webhooks you can receive here, but for each one, we give you a description, an example request body, and an example use case of the type of thing you can do with this webhook in your app. We go the extra mile and we show you how to register your webhook endpoint and even how to process these events and validate them inside of your app. And finally, we include a go live checklist, everything you need to do to get ready for production. I'll head back home and you can see here that we have a guide like this for every one of our core features. So we spend so much time on writing content that we want it all to be easy to find. So the next thing I'll mention here is our new search implementation. If you press / anywhere on the page or click to focus, you can search across our entire API reference, integration guides, and our blog. I'll do an example search here. Now I can navigate these results with my arrow keys, and you'll notice that these results are coming from our API, our integration guides, and even our blog where we write technical content. If I press enter or click, I'll be taken to the relevant result. And you can see here, we went exactly to the point where a relevant search result was included in this blog post. So we're almost done, but the final thing I want to include is developer feedback. No documentation is ever done, so we want to make sure we're updating our docs based on developer needs. Developers can enter feedback here on our site, and it's piped directly into our Slack so that we can make updates as quickly as possible. So I hope you enjoyed looking at our doc site. Come check it out live. But I'll mention a few more things to wrap up this presentation. I just want to mention how this is built. So because we consider docs a core product, we can't deliver this kind of experience using any out-of-the-box third-party solutions. So our docs are a custom build. Namely, we're using Next.js and React with TypeScript, and we use MDX to make it easier to work with Markdown. Finally, I'll mention what's next. As we continue to improve this site, we'll be writing even more documentation. There will be tons of individual tutorials, guides, and enterprise-ready content. So we've already added a CMS integration to help us add these more easily. And that's it for me. I'll hand it over to Michael to take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks for going through that, John. We are super excited about these new docs that we rolled out. There's so much more to do, but already it's just a tremendously better experience, we believe, for developers. Please check it out. Let us know what you think. You can just tag us on Twitter or DM us or shoot us a note. Would love to hear your feedback. Or you can use that little feedback widget up in the top. So next, I want to talk about developer joy. Rather, I actually want Paige to talk about developer joy. Developer joy is something that's one of our core values at WorkOS. It's actually our top value that we think about. And what developer joy means to us is actually going the extra mile for the developer experience. You know, most companies don't really think about developers, their product they sell to other people. The API is kind of a second or third tier focus. At WorkOS, developers are our audience, and we just obsess around things like documentation And excited for Paige to talk a little bit more about, as we started supporting developers, how we rethought the support experience and what we've built at WorkOS. There's some really unique stuff here. So I'll hand it over to Paige.
Hey everyone, my name is Paige Doherty and I'm a developer success engineer here at WorkOS. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we engineer developer joy. So to start off, let's think about traditional software sales and support frameworks. After that, we'll touch on the WorkOS developer success frameworks, and then talk a little bit about the technical challenges and how we're solving for scaling support to over 100 shared customer Slack channels. So traditional software sales and support frameworks optimize for the buyer experience, but our goal is to optimize for developer joy. So we had to build our own success frameworks. So how do traditional sales frameworks fail developers? Well, they cater to the business team, so executives, CIOs, but not developers themselves. That means the process isn't optimized for developers, which means there's a lot of discovery and scoping calls required before you get access to an API or even do an integration. Also, salespeople are incentivized by increasing deal size, not developer experience. So how do traditional support frameworks fail developers? Ticket and email-based support can be very slow, with response times of up to 3 days sometimes. In addition, there are very siloed support organizations, which means it's hard to quickly incorporate product feedback. Also, most support teams are not deeply technical and don't have a full breadth technical knowledge of the product. So we've taken a different approach at WorkOS. We meet developers where they are. We offer support in shared Slack channels and Zoom. So we know developers don't always read their email. We let developers try before they buy. So we offer instant API access and opt-in technical demos and live integrations to better evaluate WorkOS before making any annual commitments. In addition, our support team is technical. So all of our developer success engineers are developers themselves and help incorporate product feedback from our developers in our product. So today we have over 100 shared Slack channels with developers. Our P50 response time is 2 minutes and our P90 response time is under 15 minutes, which means we're pretty fast. We have consistent weekly engagement with dozens of developers, but the question we've been thinking a lot about is, how do we scale high-touch developer support? Turns out the answer is we build tools. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different tools that we use here at WorkOS to scale developer joy, starting with response reminders. So sometimes messages slip through the cracks. It happens. We have a bot that reminds us if we haven't responded to a message in 30 minutes. The purpose of this for the developers is to ensure timely response to every developer question. Nothing falls through the cracks with us. The next that we have is message broadcast. This tool enables us to send the same message to multiple Slack channels, broadcast to all shared channels, or just choose specific ones. We use this for product launches, beta feature rollouts, invitations to events, and more. The purpose? To allow more proactive communication with developers. So you might have gotten an invite about this event via our broadcast bot, and now you know how it got into your Slack channel. The combined stream is one of the elements of our magic sauce. It provides a stream of all developer messages into a central channel. This is really useful for our team. If you're not a member of 100 plus shared customer channels, you can easily still see all of the messages coming through those channels. And the purpose is to ensure that every developer message is seen. So error alerting. We actually pipe in internal errors that you would receive from the WorkOS dashboard directly into an internal channel. This enables us to reach out with contextual help immediately when we see errors occur throughout the setup process. The purpose of this is to provide a magical developer experience and make sure that you can find the information either in our documentation or with additional help for your specific use case. Success analytics is the next tool. So you can't measure what you can't track. This excludes nighttime. Our goal is fast responses during work hours, not 24/7. And the purpose is to hold ourselves accountable for timely developer communication. So here's how we did in our developer channels last week, for example. Total developers talked to was 25. Total messages responded to was 86. Median response time was 2 minutes, and our adjusted mean response time was 10 minutes. So developer joy is really important to us, and communication is a big part of that. So we want to make sure that we're tracking the things that are important to us. Active channel info is the last tool that I'll talk about. It lists information about most active channels and also shows dormant channels for potential re-engagement. The purpose of this is to provide a historical view of our most engaged developers and also let us know who we haven't talked to in a while. We want to reach out and make sure that you're staying updated on different product features and making sure that you're not having any blockers with WorkOS. So scaling high-touch support has required custom tooling. Slack is not a tool that's built for mass customer support on this scale, and so we had to build our own. We have an engineer full-time on staff on internal tooling and enablement for developers. And with that, we've been able to build all of these tools that help us scale the high-touch support that our developers have become so used to at WorkOS. So we do all of this so we can meet developers where they live today in Slack. So next for developer success, we're going to continue building tools and processes, extending with CRM integrations, retools so that we can see developer health analytics, billing, and more. To stay focused, our goal is to stay focused on insanely fast support and creating developer joy always. Also, if any of this resonated with you, we're hiring. We love hiring developers that love talking to customers and building developer-first products.
WorkOS before. If you've been one of our users, you've probably noticed the super fast support that we give through Slack. This is how we do it under the scenes. We had to build a lot of this stuff kind of completely from the bottom up. There's probably a startup potential there if you want to go start a company, but we're also hiring for people to come build it at WorkOS. So if you're interested, please reach out. And the result of this really, I don't know if we talked about this, is we've actually been able to have, up until recently, only 2 developer success engineers for over 100 shared channels, which is pretty outstanding. So those channels are growing quite quickly. We're hiring that team, but it's definitely worked really well for us. So those are the main talks for the day. So to quickly recap, quick summary over what we went through. First, we talked about single sign-on and how to use WorkOS to provide universal identity in your application for Okta, SAML, and every single identity provider. Then we talked about the admin portal. So this is the setup UI that's given to ITM as to actually configure this, removing a huge burden for developers to have to build something like this in-house, or sales or support teams to have to configure SAML. We talked about directory sync and how to add group sync into your application for user provisioning and deprovisioning, also for permissioning, and dynamically updating those permissions based on group membership. We went through our documentation, how we redesigned it from the bottom up from a design exercise perspective. And lastly, Paige just talked about developer joy. So how we've worked to engineer the ideal support experience for developers. So a lot of stuff. Thanks for sticking with us throughout the day. Wrapping up this section of the talk, want to let you know that WorkOS is already being used in production. It's already secure. It's already compliant. It really just checks all the boxes out of the box. So if this resonated with you and you're interested in using WorkOS, please get in touch. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We just completed our first external security code audit and penetration test. So we've had external people verify the security of our system as well, try to hack us. They couldn't. And today, thousands of people are using cloud apps that are powered by WorkOS, actually signing in, and a surprisingly large number of those at Fortune 500 companies. So it's already in production in the wild. We're ready for you whenever you're ready for us. So with WorkOS, you can integrate today, ship to those enterprise customers tomorrow, and just scale for years. We price this as usage-based, so it's just like AWS or Heroku or something like that. Very affordable to get started. We can get you an API key today to start plugging it in, with our documentation. The SDK integration is lightning fast with popular frameworks. We have a bunch of different SDKs and different frameworks. And what this effectively does is unlocks those enterprise customers. So we hope that there's no reason for you not to go after those deals and expand your business. So that's WorkOS. We make your app enterprise ready. And I'm super, super excited for the next segment that we're going to jump into, which is a fireside chat with Bryant. Just give us just a second. We're going to switch around the screen share, and he'll be on in just a moment and have a bunch of interesting stuff to chat about. So stay tuned for just a sec. Cool. So let's dive in. Super excited to chat. I had a few topics that I'd sent over that I wanted to run through and just dig in. So a lot of people I think on this call are familiar with Webflow, but maybe some are not. Wanted you just to give a quick background on that and maybe talk about kind of where the idea came from, where you started, and where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. Well, first of all, hey everyone, thanks for having me. Big fans of what WorkOS is doing, so happy to share parts of the story of Webflow with you all. So Webflow is a design and development platform, and we focus right now on empowering developers and designers to build bespoke professional websites without writing a single line of code. So right now we've got a lot of customers, over 100,000 actually, that use our platform to build all sorts of web properties, from landing pages to marketing sites like WorkOS.com, and startups all the way up to Fortune 500. So the idea really came from this pain that I've always had, that Vlad, our CEO as well, and my co-founder, around just like how broken the design and development process was for anything on the web. And for a very, very long time, I was like a Java developer, then a .NET developer, then a mobile developer. Every single time I had to build a website, I always just thought like, man, this is like so much harder than Java enterprise apps, or like doing something in .NET. So for me, it's always been just a really big chasm that I felt Webflow was a perfect product to solve for. And when we started 7 years ago, frankly, a lot of people thought we were solving the wrong problem. People told us to build Squarespace. People told us to go build something that was for mom and pops. No one really felt like there was truly a need for a product that solved the specific pain points that we're looking to solve.
That's a pretty specific bet, like not going after the mom and pops, but making something kind of a little bit more powerful, a little bit more sophisticated too. Was there a moment where you kind of felt like you validated that, like an aha moment where you were really onto something? You're like, hey, this might really work?
I'm still probably not even there. I don't even think I'm still like, despite the fact that I think we've been really successful and have gotten to where we're at, there's still aspects of our journey that I feel like are still unwritten, that no one has written yet. And it's still up to us to write it. And I think something that early founders should do relatively early on, because there's two types of founders. There's going to be like the super pessimistic ones or cynical ones, and there's going to be the hyper optimistic ones. And regardless of which camp you're in, I do think the exercise that helps founders like get their home base, and by that I mean just like really center on their product strategy and their marketing strategy, is just to do a very simple persona exercise. Like ask yourself who your ideal customer profile was. So there was a point relatively early on where we sat down, and it was the three founders, and we literally drew a picture of what our ideal customer was. And for me, I drew like a hipster in a coffee shop. He was a freelance web developer that was frustrated with giving half of his wages to another developer to code up his designs. Sorry, he was a freelance web designer. And we literally drew a picture and we put them on the wall. And for years, we called this person Robin. And every single time we would ask ourselves, what should we build next? We always refer to that picture. It was like, well, what would Robin want us to build next? So for us, it was never necessarily a realization, but it was an intentionality behind our customer, and we fabricated that customer.
I think that focus and clarity has like pretty come through in the product. You can really see that around that specific use case. I wanted to ask about your growth too. So you're kind of an unusual CTO in that you also built out go-to-market team, which is very unusual. Can you talk more about how you were kind of drawn to that, what you learned, how you stepped into that role? I think folks would love to hear about that.
Yeah, for sure. So around 3 years ago, when actually our front end engineering team set out to embark on like essentially a complete rewrite of our designer product, which is the main tool that you go and use to build your Webflow site. I was like, okay, well, if most of our engineers are going to be kind of locked up in a room doing that for the next 9 months, maybe I should go start up our marketing team. And that's it was supposed to be temporary, but it kind of turned into like a 2 or 3 year type of detour from the technology. And in that time, what I always thought was really interesting for our product was that features and feature announcements always led to big step changes in our growth. So I was just thinking at the time, well, how do I run marketing as a product? How do I think about growth as a product? And kind of similarly to how WorkOS thinks about support as a product with how you guys have automated Slack. For us, we thought about, okay, well, how do we put our product front and center so that our target audience just gets super excited about it so that they can't forget that Webflow exists? So we built things like flexboxgame.com, which is essentially a playground where someone can work through a set of 25 different levels, and using our UI, that was the way you would progress through the different levels. And it was like a Webflow project, but it taught you how to use Flexbox. And if you already knew Flexbox, you're like, oh, cool, like justify a line, like center, and like I'm pressing these buttons that I used to write code for. So that had always been the philosophy of how we thought of marketing, which is like, how do we want to provide value? How do we want to think about just wowing our customers despite them maybe not needing Webflow? So that sort of journeying into the go-to-market side of the house had always been just due to the fact that I've always been very product focused, and I wanted to see if I can build a marketing team that had some of those attributes.
So over those 3 years, starting off with product-led growth and those experiments to drive awareness, what's changed in your marketing strategy, your go-to-market strategy? Obviously, you've dramatically expanded the number of customers you have, the kind of market you're going after, you've expanded to.
Yeah. So I describe it as 3 distinct stages of our company's go-to-market. The first stage, when we literally had no marketing, was how do we break through? So what are the things that we have to do to just gain awareness in mindshare? So that's why we invested heavily in those type of like marketing games, invested really heavily in our brand, invested really heavily in getting the right kind of adverts up so that we can plug it into the growth machine and our paid machine. So that was stage 1, which is like, let's get out there, let's make sure people know. And I think we started with maybe 1 out of 10 comments on Hacker News being just like, what's Webflow? Like, I've never heard of it before. It looks like a WYSIWYG builder. And then now when I check Hacker News, like developers are chiming in and saying, yeah, I tell my marketers to use Webflow. And more often than not, people know Webflow. So I think we're out of that first stage. The second stage is we're really looking into expanding more deeply into more established companies. So mid-market enterprise companies where they already have employees that know of Webflow, but they need to figure out how to use Webflow more successfully. And the third stage, I would say, is more scale. How do we take elements of the first and second stage and operationalize it so that we can get that kind of breakout growth that we feel like we're on track for?
So going back to that persona, Robin, the web designer, who's now empowered to build stuff. In talking about going up market, going back to some of the stuff I talked about with the enterprise chasm, there's probably different personas now that you have to think about, you have to build for. And I'm curious if you could talk about that and sort of how perspective at Webflow has changed, how you've built for them, and how you factor that into your work.
Yeah, these are conversations we have almost quarterly. We're just like, who are we solving for? What kind of product are we building? And they're funny questions because for us, it's always been very difficult to say. It's always been very difficult to narrow it on just one persona. Because the fact of the matter is that Robin is building the website for an end business. And that end business could be a SMB, could be a 500-person company. It could also even be a massive global multinational. So for us, we've recently, earlier this year, we invested really heavily in a data book. And what we did was we mined our databases, we mined all of our marketing data, and we constructed essentially like a 7-page document that kind of went over like, this is the state of Webflow. These are the kinds of customers that we serve. This is how successful each customer segment is. And that has in turn helped us really develop a much sharper strategy for how we're thinking about our product, our sales efforts, as well as our marketing motions. And the funny thing is that we've realized that the strongest bifurcation of our customer segments is people that will build websites for customers and for end businesses and those end businesses themselves. It's actually a pretty interesting 50-50 split. And for us, it's something that we feel really thankful for because we always knew going out that there weren't a lot of Robins out there. Like, we just don't know. Like, I personally don't even know, like, or could call my friend, like, any freelance web designers. But in fact, there's hundreds of thousands of them. And they have, by winning over that market segment, it's really fueled a lot of the growth that we've seen in the end business market. So now we have maybe 4 or 5 different customer segments that we factor into our marketing strategy and to our product strategy.
I want to dive into that enterprise segment too, talk about that a little bit more. Today Webflow is using WorkOS for a single sign-on. How did that fit into your strategy as you were looking to go up market? I'm curious if you can talk about the integration experience, for folks that are like considering using WorkOS straight from, a user's mouth. What was it like? What was the experience you had? How did you kind of come upon it, and what's it been like?
I'm trying to think about how I first heard about it. It could have been on Twitter. It could have been someone posting it in our internal Slack thread, because we have a channel in our Slack called Made in Webflow. And every single day there's like ranging from 5 to 10 to 15 different new sites that people happen on. And we actually have a Chrome extension that pops up every single time someone visits a Webflow site, and it'll actually say, hey, this website was made in Webflow, and people get really excited about it internally. So maybe that's how I found out about WorkOS. But for me, our sales effort is very, very nascent. So we only started doing it seriously like earlier this year. It was always something that we felt like we're being drawn to up market, because we as a founder, the founder DNA is very, very product focused. So we always thought about how do we bring our products to as many people as possible. And for 7 years, that worked really, really well. But around this time last year, it just became increasingly apparent that there's some really large companies that are desperately trying to use Webflow. They want an MSA. They want to pay with an invoice. They want certain security requirements. And of course, they want single sign-on. So for me, kind of as the person, the technological founder, the person that's also in charge of go-to-market, WorkOS was kind of just like the perfect product for me as someone that had a burning need, and then also was someone that, frankly, I was the last person that touched the authentication code. And that was some of the first code that I ever wrote for Webflow back in May of 2013. And none of it had really changed. So it was actually quite easy for me, because I was going in there and was kind of marveling at it's just like the kind of code that I used to write 7 years ago. And not only did I integrate WorkOS, I think maybe in 4 to 5 hours end to end, but I also fixed a lot of bugs along the way. I refactored a bunch of functions. I wrote more tests. So it ended up being a net positive, not just for our VP of sales, Kai, who's very, very happy that we got it out, but then also for our engineering team, because I got in and fixed a few things and added a lot more tests.
Yeah, I think I remember when you guys were rolling it out. I'm trying to remember. I think there was a designer on your team who actually like went through the admin setup experience, and even like somebody with essentially no familiarity with SSO was able to set stuff up and configure it with WorkOS.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Her name's Kristen, and she was a pleasure to work with. And yeah, that's right. She has no idea what SAML stands for, doesn't even know what it is, and was able to go through the setup as a non-technical person, which was pretty amazing.
What's next for you in terms of Webflow becoming more enterprise ready? I'm sure you're track with these companies that are larger. How do you think about incorporating that into your product roadmap and enabling more growth?
Well, there's certain things that are table stakes features for enterprise companies, things like audit logs, session management, being able to share our site traffic logs with certain customers. And those are things that we're going to get to. For us, we really want to be thinking about some of the things that we should already have in our product, things like roles and permissions, things like more like better collaboration workflows inside of the product. And those are all things that Robin didn't necessarily need. But for us, we do know how important it is to have those features going forward, especially as our customers have larger teams. They're running larger and larger websites. They have, in some cases, 20 different people involved with the publishing of the website. So thinking about workflows, like, all right, how do I get legal, marketing, and product and our copywriters all working in the same CMS and not stepping on each other's toes? Those are all things and problems that we're thinking really deeply about. And I think that'll not just help our upmarket motion, but it'll help, all of our users. It'll help the Robin, because now the Robin, even though this person's a freelance web designer, can say, I'm using a technology platform that can even fit the most complex of use cases. And that's a story that makes me really happy. For someone to know that this person, like, oh, I was only used to making $35,000 a year, and now I'm bringing in 6-figure invoices because of what I can build in Webflow. That's ultimately something that I'm really excited and motivated by.
That's got to be the best feeling. I mean, we feel this too, like enabling other people to have transformative effect on whatever they're building, or enable them to create something that they couldn't maybe even imagine before. That's what it's about. Yep. So Webflow started in 2012. Is that right? Around then?
It was incorporated 2012, and then we launched in 2013. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, 7, 8 years is a long time. What have you seen change since then in terms of the landscape of product? There's this like phrase "no code" that everyone talks about now. There's a conference for it, which I know you guys did. Yeah. How does Webflow play into that? How do you think about the future going forward beyond just getting websites up?
Yeah, so what's changed? A lot has changed. Before, the wave that we were riding was the responsive web design wave. And that's really, the wave that we caught, because not a lot of tools incorporated responsive web design. Now with no code getting as big as it is, which I think is funny, because I think that's just what software is. Software is just no code. You used to write assembly language, now you write C, now you're writing, it's just abstractions on top of abstractions, and no code is just the latest abstraction. For us, I think what's around the corner is digital teams really owning the end-to-end lifecycle of content. and then also the creation of the content, but then also design. So typically when companies reach a certain scale, they only work exclusively with agencies. But what we've seen is a lot of companies, whether they like it or not, they're being forced to adopt technology and they're forced to bring it in-house. And that gives opportunities for Webflow, WorkOS, and others just a tremendous ability to empower internal champions and to provide that type of value delivery. And I think that's going to be a trend that's going to stick around for a while, where we're going to see oil and gas companies think about how to incorporate digital technology into how they want to engage with their customers. You're going to think about how insurance companies, fintech, et cetera, are going to want to have really customizable landing pages and designs to connect with their audience. So those are all things and trends that we're picking up on, and hopefully Webflow is well situated for.
Really feels like the website is the front door to so many of those opportunities going forward. It's a good strategic place to start with. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
So last question I wanted to ask you, wrapping up. I know a lot of people listening to this and watching are kind of in that bucket of founders, probably technical background, probably building a workplace tool, thinking about building productivity apps. And I was wondering if you had any last advice to share for people like that, how to think about focusing their business. What would you say maybe to the Bryant of 10 years ago, thinking about embarking on Webflow and where they are today with where the market is today?
Yeah, what's worked for me, because there's a lot of advice out there. So I will share with you all what has worked for me. Is I've always chosen to address problems that I've innately experienced myself. So whether it's building a website from scratch, whether it's scaling a technology, whatever it is, I've always felt that it's much, much easier to have a strong vision for your company when that vision stems from an innate pain or innate problem that you've experienced in the past. So I would say, don't try to solve someone else's problem. Solve yours. You're gonna have a much higher chance of success. And if you don't feel like you have a lot of problems, go work inside of a large company. You will see a lot of problems arise. So specific to the workplace and workforce software, it's just right for a lot of companies to have immediate impact, because it could be SSO, it could be something around collaboration, it could be something about asset management. Large companies have a lot of surface area to address, and if you're in a company that has some of those problems, it's going to be very easy for you to think about how to build a solution for them. Actually, I see Hiten Shah on here. So he's solving a problem that I think a lot of people are going to experience. So use FYI.com. If you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely go check it out.
Awesome shout out. With that, we can wrap up. Bryant, thanks so much for joining. We're super happy to be supporting Webflow and hope to work together for many years to come. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
And everyone listening and watching, that's it for today. That is our fall release. See you next quarter. Thanks a lot. Take care.